Okay, gotta admit, when we say liquid waste management, it doesn't exactly sound like a rock concert.
Right, maybe not the first thing you'd put on your playlist.
But seriously, this is one of those things, it's way more interesting
Oh, absolute.
than it sounds on the surface. We're going deep on this one,
Yeah.
really digging into a world
Yeah,
that's, well, let's just say it's way more important than most people
for
realize.
sure. And fascinating, too, once you get past the,
The ick factor.
yeah, kind of. But really, it's something we all depend on every single day. Most of us just don't think about it.
Until there's a problem, right? Like when,
Exactly. Nobody wants to think about what's going on down there until it, well,
until it backs up on you.
exactly.
So we're talking about GreenFlow today, a company that's been dealing with all this stuff for over 30 years.
And they're not just plumbers either. What they're doing is actually really interesting, both the tech and the environmental side of it.
So for our listeners out there, you know, the ones who love those aha moments, those little details that most people miss, today's deep dive is for you.
We're going to break it all down. What liquid waste actually is, all the different types, why it matters, and how GreenFlow is tackling the challenge.
Because it's not as simple as just flushing and forgetting, right?
Definitely not. And just to be clear, we're not just talking about what goes down the toilet here, although that's a big part of it. But liquid waste, that's a whole other world. We're talking industrial byproducts, chemicals, wastewater from factories,
Oh, wow. Okay.
even things like used oil. It's a lot more than people realize.
So definitely not something you want to just like dump in a landfill.
Not a good idea. Each of those types of waste, they have their own properties, their own potential hazards.
Yeah, like what?
Some of it's corrosive, some of it's toxic, and it all has to be handled, disposed of,
Hmm.
according to some really strict regulations. And that's where a company like GreenFlow comes in.
Okay, so that's a good transition to GreenFlow. What is it about them that sets them apart in this industry?
Well, one thing that makes them really stand out is their focus on, they have this whole thing they call advanced treatment processes. And what that means is they're not just collecting the waste and then, shipping it off somewhere else. They're actually treating it,
Yes.
often right there at the source, using some really sophisticated technology.
So less dumping, more processing.
Exactly. It's a totally different way of thinking about it. They're being proactive, which really fits in with all the emphasis these days on sustainability.
Mm.
And for someone like you, who's interested in the why, not just the what, it's pretty fascinating stuff.
It definitely is. So how does this actually work? Are we talking like a secret lab with scientists in lab coats
Well, no lab coats, but
breaking down sludge with lasers? What are these advanced treatment processes all about?
well, it's not lasers, but it is pretty high tech. One of the things they use, for example, are these things called membrane bioreactors.
Membrane bioreactors.
Yeah, or MBRs for short.
Yeah.
It sounds complicated, but basically these systems, they use these special membranes, and those membranes filter out all the pollutants, all the bacteria, and you end up with a much, much higher quality of treated water. Way better than what you get with the old methods.
Okay, see, this is what I'm talking about. Membranes, filtration, that's the cool stuff, the behind the scenes action.
It is pretty cool. And it's a perfect example of how GreenFlow is using tech not just to manage the waste, but to actually maybe even help create a more sustainable future. Because remember that high-quality treated water we talked about?
Yeah.
Well, a lot of the time that water can be reused,
Oh, interesting. Like for what?
like irrigation, or even in certain industrial processes,
Yeah.
which then takes the pressure off our freshwater resources.
So it's not just about what they're taking away, it's about what they're giving back, or at least reusing in a smarter way.
Makes a lot of sense. But let's get into the weeds a little bit. We were talking before about all the different types of liquid waste out there. So how do they deal with all that variety? There's like a one-size-fits-all solution, or does it get a little more creative?
It's it's definitely not one size fits all, that's for sure. GreenFlow, they've actually developed these what they call specialized solutions, so the different approaches for different industries, different types of waste.
So like custom-tailored, kind of.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and think of it like a bespoke suit, but for your liquid waste. You want something that fits perfectly right, make sure it's handled right, safely, all that. Okay, so let's say you've got like a hospital or a biotech lab. They're dealing with some pretty specific stuff, right? And it's highly regulated.
Mhm.
How does GreenFlow approach that kind of situation?
So what they do is they've got this whole team of experts, and these guys, they work directly with the client. So they figure out, okay, what are your needs? What kind of waste are we talking about here? What are the regulations you need to follow? And then they put together this whole custom plan.
Wow. Okay.
And that plan covers everything: collection, transportation, treatment, disposal, the whole 9 yards.
So it's not just a matter of throwing everything in the same truck and hoping for the best.
Definitely not.
Mm.
Especially with something like medical waste. There are some serious rules about that. And that actually brings up a good point. I mean, we've talked about how GreenFlow does things differently, but are there like a lot of regulations in this industry? Like they can't just, you know,
Do whatever they want.
exactly.
Yeah, I kind of figured as much. It's not like they can just pour this stuff down the drain, right?
No, it's actually one of the biggest challenges they face. Liquid waste management, it's one of those things. It's super heavily regulated.
Yeah.
And on top of that, the rules are always changing. So GreenFlow, they have to constantly adapt, constantly make sure that what they're doing is up to code.
So it's not just about following the rules, it's about staying ahead of them.
Exactly. It's about understanding where the industry is going and being proactive. Because the goal here isn't just to, check the boxes. It's about protecting the environment, making sure things are done safely and responsibly.
Right, because if they cut corners, it's not just their problem, it's everyone's problem.
Exactly. And they know that, which is why they've got this whole team that's completely dedicated to compliance. They use technology to track everything, monitor every step of the process. They're serious about it.
Well, that's good to hear, especially with something that could be, potentially dangerous if it's not handled right. But we've talked a lot about the how and the why. What about the impact? What are some of the things they've actually accomplished?
Well, one thing they're really proud of is this partnership they have with One Tree Planted.
Oh, I've heard of them.
Yeah, so for every service that GreenFlow provides, they plant a tree.
That's awesome.
It's a really cool way for them to kind of offset their footprint,
Yeah.
contribute to reforestation, all that.
Yeah, I like that. It's a simple idea, but it's powerful.
Absolutely. And it's not just about planting trees either. They're always looking for new ways to improve their processes, make them even more environmentally friendly. Like they use technology to optimize their routes, so they use less fuel. They even recycle some of the materials they use.
So they're really going above and beyond the bare minimum. That's cool. It's really cool to see, a company in this kind of industry taking sustainability so seriously.
Yeah, it's not just a nice thing to do anymore. It's becoming really important for their bottom line even.
You think so?
Oh, absolutely. Customers, we're all more aware these days, right? People care about where their stuff comes from, what happens to it after they're done.
For sure. And speaking of customers, I bet some of our listeners are wondering about the whole cost thing. Like, is GreenFlow just for these big corporations?
That's a great question, and it's something they've thought about for sure. They actually have a whole bunch of different services and pricing options, so they can work with pretty much anyone.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, they work with big industrial facilities, obviously, but also smaller businesses, even some residential clients, too.
So they're not just all about the big bucks then?
Nope. They really believe that everyone should have access to this stuff. Safe, sustainable waste management, no matter how big or small you are.
That's awesome. It's not just about the profit, it's about making a difference,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
Well, this has been, honestly, way more interesting than I thought it would be when we started.
Yeah.
GreenFlow is doing some really cool stuff. Got to give them credit. They're really pushing the envelope on this whole liquid waste thing.
I completely agree. It's really a whole different way of thinking about it, and they're proving it can work.
Yeah, they are. And for our listeners, the ones who get excited about those little details, those aha moments, I think we've given them a few today. Who knew liquid waste could be so fascinating?
Right.
But as we wrap up here, the one thing I'm left wondering is what's next? What's the future hold for all this? What new challenges, what new opportunities are out there? Something to think about as you go about your day, because this whole world, it's a lot more complex and a lot more important than most people realize. And hey, maybe next time you flesh, you'll think of us.